Alrighty, AP kids, you guys should be the only ones watching this because it's dealing with ideology and public policy. We left off on the board today with modern liberalism of the 20th century or New Deal liberalism, and we talked about what that is and what that meant. Remember, that's FDR with New Deal liberalism because he called for an active role in government, created social welfare programs, helped organize labor, and I talked about how equality is the prime political value here. So we did classic liberalism, which is right there. And so we were on modern liberalism. We were on 3. You need for a strong central government to smooth out the rough edges of capitalism. Again, that's about going back to equality. The video talked about it, about how in capitalism you have the have and the have-nots, and that's why you have to have a strong government, social welfare programs, and things of this nature to smooth out those rough edges of capitalism, to help those who can't help themselves. And then 4 says you need the role of government is to protect people's well-being. You want freedom from government control. It rings hollow when one is poor, unemployed, or discriminated against. What does that mean? That unless people, again, have opportunity, economic equality, then protecting people's well-being really doesn't make a difference because, or freedom from government doesn't make a difference because people don't have the money to do anything. So that's kind of the basis of modern liberalism. And then we go from modern liberalism to strong influence of liberalism from the 1930s, obviously with FDR, to the 1970s, because you had JFK, you had LBJ. However, there becomes a backlash in the 1980s and 90s against liberalism. They feel like it says here, that liberalism went too far. So you need to get back to more individualism. Remember, we talked about putting more onus, more responsibility on the individual and less on the government to deal with situations. And so more responsibility on the individual, less reliance on the government, on big government, is what the backlash in the 80s and 90s against liberalism was. It became known as a kind of a bad word, that ideology of liberalism. Well, then in the mid-90s, you're going to have what's called neoliberals. And these are less likely to rely upon government as solution to problems. However, government certainly has some role to play, but not as big of a role as desired by the New Deal liberals. So what they're saying there is government's important, but not as important as creating all these programs and expanding the size of government to fix our problem. You had this with Bill Clinton and John Edwards. They were in the mid-90s, obviously, with President Clinton, and the late 90s and early 2000s with John Edwards. Actually, he's gone through some trials lately, so. But anyway, but you still get the picture. Here's the important part with F. Make sure you highlight this in your notes. We return to modern liberalism or New Deal liberalism with the election of President Obama. We talked about that. But now, how is that? Because again, we're expanding the role of government. I put here more of a willingness to use the federal government as a tool to protect the well-being of the people. So expanding the role of government, expanding the size of government. Think Obamacare. Obamacare is an example of that. Again, we're getting the government involved, making it bigger, helping people who can't help themselves. That's basically what Obamacare is. I know there's other things with it, but you understand what I mean. So what we also had today in the video was conservatism. And what is conservatism? And so politicians started using this in 1964 with Senator Goldwater. And he was an opponent of active role of government. And so he favored free market capitalism, state rights over national supremacy. Remember, just think about, the video was talking about the civil rights movement, and civil rights should be a state issue, not a national issue. That was conservatism. That's what we're talking about there with Barry Goldwater. And individual choice in economic affairs. Don't have the government be involved with social welfare programs and things of this nature, and job training. So conservatism is essentially classic liberalism, what we talked about earlier today, having that limited role of government and those things. And so this starts to really have a resurgence movement in the late 1970s. You had Reagan, Bush, and both Bushes do this in Republican Congress. And so where was the strength? Solid South, the Rocky Mountains, Great Plains, Middle America is where the strength really was with that. Evangelical Christians, which is, again, these are all still part of conservatism. And they pushed the conservative movement, those conservative values that were there. Again, 5, we don't look to the government for those problems. Emphasis today is on the private sector to solve problems. Put next to this, Medicare, Social Security. We were talking about that article today you guys read about the Democrats and the Republicans and their platform. The Republicans were talking about taking those entitlement programs and making them in the private sector. So put that there in your notes in number 6. Strong support for large tax cuts, which occurred under both Clinton and Bush 43. Again, they put the Bush tax cuts, put that there. Extending those Bush tax cuts is what they're talking about. Tax cuts for the corporations, tax cuts for small businesses and things of this nature to try to get the economy going again. So then we go from there to what's called the neoconservatives and the quote-unquote new right here. Some are Helms, Buchanan, Robertson, Bennett, and they emphasize social issues like prayer in school, anti-abortion, anti-homosexuality, support from evangelical Christians, and they're known as the religious right. They also, as you can tell, play a big role in our politics because look at that Republican platform. They were anti-gay marriage and they were anti-abortion. What is that going to be? That's going to be an example of neoconservatives and the new right. So just remember that religion plays a big part of that when it talks about morals and ethics, and so that's a huge issue there. Another one is dealing with foreign threats as terrorism, like Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz. They're more supportive in world intervention, going to war to stop the quote-unquote spread of terrorism, to keep, again, our prosperity going, the role of democracy going, things of this nature. Then you also have an extreme version of this, which is Pat Buchanan, the neo-isolationists, who shy away from intervention in world order, and are wary of international organizations. And these are international, United Nations, world, the IMF, NAFTA, the World Bank. All these things have to do with, whether it's creating one economy, one bank, or free trade agreements, which is NAFTA, North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement. He again he's kind of pushing for extremist views there with Buchanan. But that's just that. Then you go from kind of the neoconservatives to more compassionate conservatism. And this is George W. Bush 43, a more moderate brand of conservatism there. And so that's kind of where we evolved from that to where we just left off with. Some other things that you have in the political spectrum and ideology is socialism. And this is a system of production, distribution, and exchange are controlled by the government. I write this in there next to socialism as well. Expand welfare, expand healthcare, and tax the rich. Yes, that sounds like liberalism. Yes, that sounds like Obama. That's why people call Obama a socialist, but essentially he's not, but they make those comparisons. That's how Fox News does it and some other Republicans. But you can see why, because he wants to expand, healthcare and tax the rich and things of this nature. Those are socialist ideas, but he doesn't necessarily agree with all the other socialist ideas. The second part with socialism, strong impact upon Western Europe. A lot of Western Europe is socialist. So that's what that means. And for reasons why this is not here in the United States, because it is associated with radicalism and the belief in the individual and the belief in the American dream and the suspicion of big government. What that means is that we believe in the power of the individual. But socialism, you're not going to have the power of the individual. You're going to have the power of the collective and the government. So that's why we're not into that. We believe in the individual and the state rights and things of this nature. We believe in the power, again, of the individual. It's one of our political cultural things. We believe in the American dream, working hard, getting paid for what you work, and being rewarded for that. Again, that goes kind of against what socialism is. And we don't want big government. Big government is socialism. Having too much government agencies, they control everything. That's what we're anti. So that's what we're really trying to get away from. If you want an example of this, Bernard Saunders from Vermont is an example of a socialist in our political system. So they do exist. Then you have the crazies, and that's the libertarianism. And then I'm nothing against libertarians, but a little bit more extreme. They emphasize individual liberty, underlying individual liberty. They emphasize this big time. They oppose virtually every government program. The FBI, the IRS, the CIA, they don't trust any of them. And so they oppose those. They are very conservative on economic issues and liberal on social issues. I'll say that again, very conservative on economic issues and liberal on social issues. They want a small, weak government, central government. They want to repeal anti-drugs. They want to repeal, again, anti-abortion stuff, anti-prostitution, anything that's anti-pornography. They want to get rid of that stuff. They want everything to be basically legal. So the last thing is extreme cutback on the role of government, especially government that should only defend the nation. So get rid of the government telling us what we can and can't do, and just make sure we're defended, we're protected, and we will be fine with that. And this is where we're going to go tomorrow, so I'll do that. So anyway, any questions, please write it down. If you have any questions, any points of interest you want to talk about, write it down. Ask those questions at the beginning of class. All right, I hope you guys have a great night. You guys truly are amazing. This will be posting here in a second.